encountering. So I have 5 slides to share with you some of the fairly aggressive actions that we've taken under the direction of the superintendent to deal with the potential deficit. We begin with one of 5 slides. The first slide describes some of the energy savings measures that we're considering here. To begin with, we've taken an action to shut down all of the school boilers on weekends. That, of course, means there's no heat being provided to the building, and also means there's no hot water. So we're going to try to continue this action as long as we can during the winter. Secondly, we're very aggressively monitoring the building temperatures. You may have heard comments, if any of you are parents of school children. We have the ability in some cases to remotely impact many of the zones within the 5 buildings on a computerized basis, and we're doing that on a very aggressive action. We're working with teachers and staff to shut off lights, as this is something we should always be doing, but you know, issues of this nature tend to accentuate the need to do things such as this. Because most of the corridors in the buildings are not heated, we want to make sure that the teachers close their doors so that their thermostats aren't picking up cold air from the corridors. So we're keeping classroom doors closed. We're working with teachers and staff to remove extraneous microwaves and refrigerators and heaters from classrooms because we're attempting to save on electricity and kilowatts. We're through the principals, we've been sending home notices to students reminding kids to dress more warmly. If you walk through the corridors of any of the buildings, you'd be surprised at how many kids are still wearing shorts. I suspect that as the weather gets colder, they'll stop doing that. We now have the ability to shut down computers. Even though computers can go into sleep mode, they're still drawing electricity. So on a centralized basis, we're actually shutting down computers through our network on a daily basis. When you have 400 computers, that can add up. We're also encouraging kind of a friendly competition among and between the schools. We have data going back 5 years on kilowatt consumption and natural gas use on a decatherm basis, and we're adjusting some of that for degree units, and we're encouraging each of the schools to see which school can save the most heating energy and electrical energy. On a consumables basis, we're working to enact a freeze on much of the consumables that are used in classrooms. That includes such things as ink cartridges and the whole myriad of office supplies. We're working to kind of share resources across the district. If one school has extra in any particular area, we're sharing them across the district. We've also looked, because the school department accounting system is an encumbrance-based system where we try to reserve and encumber funds in all areas, we've reviewed all of the existing encumbrances, and we've been liquidating many of the outstanding encumbrances as we can to try to get a better fix on our ability to save money as the year progresses. We've also enacted a hiring freeze. This is a challenging issue for the school department because the vast majority of our employees are teachers. And we're going to focus many of our efforts on the area of substitute teachers as the year progresses. We're hoping as much as we can to shift assignments, meaning that we're hoping to use paraprofessionals in slightly different capacities, particularly on a short-term basis if a teacher is out. Another example of shift assignments that we're focusing on is we're looking at the possibility of changing some custodial hours so that, for example, in the school department, each of the 5 schools has one first shift custodian, even the high school, the largest building. So if that custodian is out for any reason, that building is unattended. In the past, what we would often do is provide coverage, particularly at lunch, when you really need a custodian in the lunchroom after the lunch is over. We would provide that service through a short-term overtime basis, a short-term overtime shift detail. Instead of doing that, we're going to be moving we're in the midst now of figuring out how we can move some evening custodians into kind of a mid-shift basis to cover daytime absences when they take place. I've noted that on this area here. We're also at the same time looking at, we understand that if we're going to shift evening custodians to a day shift, it is going to have an impact. And as much as we understand the importance of cleaning every classroom, every rest facility, every nook and cranny of the building, that may not happen in some of the weeks and months to come, given the fact that we're going to shift our resources as best we can. We're investigating at the same time the possibility of curtailing building use. We have not reached any conclusions on that issue, but we understand that the impact of having the buildings open 7 nights a week does have a cost. The last slide talks about photocopiers and paper use. That's a major expense for the school department. You know, you may look at some of these bullets and think, well, that's a small thing, but I think a lot of small things can add up to medium-sized or larger things. And we're working with teachers and staff now to photocopy on both sides of the paper. We are forsaking in many cases, the daily notice that goes home in student backpacks, and we're using email to provide notification and information to parents. We're reworking our photocopier policies to try to reduce the costs there, and our overall goal in the paper area is to reduce by 1/3 the amount of paper we use. So this is our first shot at our attempts to work within the budget reversions that may take place. We encourage all of our staff to work with us on this. We also are looking for suggestions from anybody who has them. And we've been optimistic. We've been feeling good about the first wave. We've been at this now for about 3 weeks, and we've had some great ideas. We can feel that the staff has been working with us and cooperating, and we hope that as the winter goes on, it'll continue. Thank you.
At this point, we'll entertain questions from the audience. You can direct them at either the Board of Selectmen or the school committee. There's members of the finance committee here too, I believe.
This question is through you, Mr. Chairman, to Carl Nelson. Have you figured out what the impact is going to be on the most recent pay cuts above and beyond the sped stuff? Or have you in fact figured out the sped cuts that are going to occur? And is that number, Mr. Chairman, reflected in this 09 revenue shortfall?
The sped?
The sped decrease?
No, because we had talked at a financial planning team meeting about that, and we're informed by Mr. Nelson that that particular cut that was made has insignificant impact on the current school budget. Although there was a concern going downstream that it may have some impact.
Thank you, and that is the understanding we have. There have been discussions about reducing our circuit breaker allotment. Circuit breaker is a fund that acts as a shock absorber to high-cost special education expenses. And the cut that the governor included in his budget message cut the available funding from 75% to 72%. And that 3% difference was the reserve that was held aside for school districts that had extremely high, out-of-the-ordinary costs. So unless you're a community suffering from that kind of difficulty, and North Reading, as high as our costs are, we're not in any kind of extreme cases such as that. So we don't see any impact on the circuit breaker costs. And that was the one we were concerned about. So
that's functioning the pothole money.
Yes, that's right.
Mrs. Bailey?
Yes, Marcy Bailey, 21 Drain Drive, for the school department. These measures that you've taken, do you feel that will address the $200,000 potential cut that you've been asked to make, and then I was wondering, how much is the line item for substitutes and how much will be saved by not filling those positions specifically?
There are so many uncertainties when you try to project 9 months in advance, as you're asking us to do. Our best estimate that the budget measures that I outlined a few minutes ago will save us somewhere in the vicinity of $100,000. And the obvious next question is, where does the rest come from? And we're hoping for the ability to be aggressive with our energy savings above and beyond what we've described here. If we have a mild winter, there's a major savings there. If we don't have, the school budget, as the town budget, has half a dozen lines that are predicated upon things you don't know until the year goes through. Other lines that we're watching carefully is we're self-funded for unemployment insurance. That's a hard one to predict at that point, but we're hoping to extract savings from that area. We're also hoping to extract savings from our substitute accounts that provide substitute teacher coverage for teachers on maternity leave. We have another large area in legal expenses that we haven't touched yet, and if the year continues in this nature, we'll be able to extract the rest of our savings from that. I don't know if that was a wishy-washy answer, but there are a lot of uncertainties we're still trying to come to grips with in this short 2 or 3 week period we've been dealing with it.
Well, let me give a little more shape to that. Let me give you one example of the kind of expense reduction that I've crossed off. I've asked each of the principals to be very specific about their expenses. We're not doing any field trips this year from this point forward, not because field trips they're generally funded by students, particularly elementary and middle school, through fees for the bus costs. I'm concerned about the substitute costs. So unless I can be assured that the funding for a teacher who is remaining or whose class is not covered, this is more of a high school issue than it is in elementary. Typically in elementary, the children go off, the entire class goes. At the high school, if I'm a science teacher and I'm taking my physics class to a particular workshop, I may have other classes for which those classes need to be covered. We're cutting those. Another expense, just as an expense item, and this is also a high school example, for the last 5 to 8 years in the 9th grade, we have administered a standardized test called the Terra Nova test. It is a test that is very much aligned with the SAT, and it helps to be, we found it to be a predictive value for students to look at their SAT, prepare for their SAT. It's a $6,500 expense. We've eliminated it for next year. You asked the substitute teaching budget. This is for general substitutes, $235,000. So for day-to-day substitutes, we're going to be shifting, taking paraprofessionals off of their other assigned duties and putting them in classrooms. So you're going to see at all levels some real problems within the school, but because of coverage and supervision. We had a physical education teacher who was hired at the Hood School last summer, and this individual was hired on a part-time basis. This person landed a full-time job in the town of Reading and left. And so we have replaced that position with a substitute for the balance of the school year. I predict that will save probably $10,000 or $15,000. We have other we have other long-term leaves where female teachers will be out on maternity leave. 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 4 months, or more. And I'm going to be each one of those.